So I'm actually starting the recording now because we're gonna have a lot of conversation and we need to make sure we catch everything. I just also want to mention that Collaborate Ultra, that the tool that we're currently using, is linked to Canvas, and it's the one that we highly recommend you using if you don't teach courses over 250 students. Otherwise, you would be using Zoom, but Collaborate Ultra would be the primary system to use in that case for synchronous sessions. All right. Okay, so before we get started with anything, I usually try to start with a simple question. So basically, I'm going to give you a minute and think about what is the main thing you'd like to leave with today. So you can use the chat to share, your idea, and in 1 minute we're going to summarize very quickly what you come up with. So share your response in the chat. Thank you. All right. Oh boy, a lot of things. Right.
A lot of strategies around engagement, some comments around different time zones, thinking about efficiency in online teaching and learning, and large classes and engagement. Yeah, and some of those practical considerations like bandwidth are certainly new territory when you're in an online environment.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's impressive to see all these things popping up very quickly. Okay. So a couple of objectives for us today. So based on the conversation, we hope you can make an informed decision about an online blended learning format for your course. And I'll be describing a little bit what I mean by that. Identify elements of your course that will be facilitated in a real time and developed online. So that's going to be a lot of work for us as well. And then thoughtfully integrate both aspects of an online blended learning format to support student engagement and active learning, which is something that some of you already indicate, being efficient and providing, maybe different types of, online learning. So, quick definition of blended learning. We don't always assume everyone, is aware of what it is really, and so a definition will help us set the ground. So, blended learning it's the use of a traditional class teaching methods together with the use of online learning for the same students studying the same content in the same course. It is a thoughtful fusion of face-to-face and online learning experiences. So basically that definition sets the ground for the traditional blended, which is a mix of face-to-face teaching with some online material. But in this case, we decide to have something from, let's say, a different focus. Hence that image over there. So the goal is, in fact, using blended learning, but to teach, a course that is fully online, which is the situation we are right now. Like for the next two or 3 months, we'll be teaching online. And what can we do in that case? So blended learning could actually be used in that case. So instead of having some face-to-face interaction, you could certainly replace that face-to-face doing some real-time teaching, but in the same time doing some development of asynchronous material or things that basically students could do on their own online. So that mix could be something that you could definitely consider. That would also maybe allow some easier transition to online teaching and learning.
Great, thanks, Manuel. And so there's two different kinds of activities that we'll speak to today, and one of them is synchronous, meaning that it happens in real time. So a really good example of that is what we're doing right now. With our video conference and having you all in the same space right in the same moment, this is a synchronous activity. Asynchronous means that it's created and it lives online and students can access it at varying times depending on their schedules. So for example, once this lecture is once this session is recorded, folks can access it at different times, so it also becomes an asynchronous tool down the road. And so ideally, with this mix of both of these activities, we are really trying to capture ways to engage students and avoid kind of what's seen in this picture in terms of just a student and their computer without any interactions or activities or engagement. And so in thinking about different really concrete examples of some different activities, I found this graphic to be really helpful in starting to visualize and conceptualize that. And it starts to bring into account some of those more logistical pieces around bandwidth, but also around immediacy and what your intention is in creating different activities. And so, for example, we have the high bandwidth but low immediacy. It might look like pre-recorded lecture sessions, or some pre-recorded audio, or asynchronous discussions with audio. So there's ways to upload audio files and have discussions amongst students that don't necessarily need to be happening right in the same moment. If we're looking to those things that are low immediacy but lower bandwidth, instead of using audio, we could be using text. So discussion boards and Canvas are a really great example of that. Or reading with, or different readings that are assigned that are text or image-based. Email is another good example there. In terms of those things that need to happen right now, there's a lot of really good examples of what's going on in our session right at this moment. So we have video conferences and audio conferences that do require quite a bit more bandwidth. But then there's also this chat, really wonderful chat feature in the side that doesn't necessarily require the same amount of bandwidth, but does allow us to interact in real time. And collaborative documents, such as like the UBC Wiki or like Google Docs, are other good examples. How we're using the word bandwidth today, thanks Natalie, is in terms of like internet capabilities. So this requires, a video would require more content to be downloaded to the internet in a fast manner so that it could be relayed in real time, which is that reference to bandwidth. So it's not necessarily that nod to the theory that Seaver Sheldon's put forward around more human bandwidth. It's about internet right now. This constraints could be student N. George, thanks for that question in terms of bandwidth considerations, but it could also be instructor considerations if you have a class of many students and everyone has the video on, the video might start becoming quite a bit slower, but then also depending on what kind of internet speed you have at home, or if you're living in a rural community, it's certainly from both different perspectives. And Lena, I see there's a question about like human bandwidth, and that's a theory that's been shared really broadly by someone named Seaver Sheldon. And we're not going to speak too much to it today in our session, but I'll add a link to an upcoming session in the notes where they'll speak a bit more into that theory. And so we have a brainstorm activity now. And so this is for you to think on your own, and then you can share your responses in the sidebar. And yes, Jillian, slides will be shared. It would be wonderful now if you could take 2 to 3 minutes to think about some ideas for different asynchronous or synchronous activities that could be used in your course.
So note will be referring back to these activities. So it would be nice if you could maybe have a piece of paper and write down some of the key things you're thinking of. What are the things that work well asynchronously or work best synchronously, and then in the next 10 minutes we'll be going back to this. So keep a note somewhere on a paper, and also maybe share on the chat as well. Thanks. Yes, we'll make sure to slow down a bit. Sorry about that, Michael. So just to define again, synchronous and asynchronous. Synchronous would be the things you can be teaching in real time, okay? The things you would do, I would say, in class. And asynchronous would be the things that could be done in a different time, meaning things students can do on their own without having to be there at a specific time or the same time. Thank you so much. There are a lot of great ideas there. So thank you. Keep sharing. Another minute maybe, and then we'll move on to the next slide.
And to answer your question, Lena, this is about the point of view from the student and the instructor. For synchronous activities, the instructor would likely be involved in real time in the teaching there. And for asynchronous, it could be developed in advance and create and live there, but it is really student focused.
All right, couple of more seconds, and then we'll continue.
So holding on to all of those great ideas and keep thinking them up. But we're going to move forward from this slide here, and I promise we'll have a chance to revisit it. Thinking a little bit more about asynchronous and synchronous, when might they be most appropriate? So in teaching and learning, we're always coming back to what are the course outcomes or objectives, and how can students find their way there? And so it's thinking about which activities could support students in making their way to those learning goals. And so if students are being called to reflect on complex issues or specific content that could be learned on their own, an asynchronous approach might work well. Whereas if there's complex issues to be discussed or to start planning something, synchronous could make sense. And there's some more considerations up on the slide here. I'll give you a moment to reflect on.
And as you can see in the how, we provide a list of very, I would say, typical systems or tools that we're supporting at UBC. And looking at the comments that most of you provide, most of you, I guess, have been already using video conferencing systems like Collaborate Ultra or Zoom. And same thing, if you consider using asynchronous, I've seen that some of you have already been using peer assessment, discussions, and so on. So it's a nice way to kind of see the kind of variety of things that could be done in both, I would say, modalities. So this is not a finalized list, but this is giving you a list of typical things that we see across many courses being used. Sunil, you have a question?
Yeah, well, I'm going to be teaching a film course, term 2 summer, and I was wondering, I mean, will it be possible to upload the entire film for them to view asynchronously? I'm sorry, did you get my question?
No, it's okay. It's not an easy question. I'm not an expert of copyright. I would assume that's something to check with the UBC library.
I don't think it should be a copyright issue because I show them, I mean, it's usually shown to the students anyway. So if we are not violating copyright there, I don't think there would be a copyright issue there.
Okay. There's a comment in the chat. You may want to check with the copyright office at UBC just to make sure that's actually something you could do. That's
Okay.
less my area of expertise. I'm sorry.
Okay, but technically it's possible, just technically.
Technically, you could, yes.
Okay. Thanks.
All right.
And Sunil, Judy's just made a comment in the chat as well that some other film instructors are making arrangements with the library for like live streaming videos as well.
Thank you. Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay. So moving to the next slide, in this activity, we basically describe the approach in this particular session, so the bridging aspect. So you've been thinking, in the chat of the things that you think work best asynchronously, so things that basically students could do at their own pace. And you've been also listing quite a lot of activities of synchronous things. Let's say, I want to keep my lecture going on because I like the engagement. I like the fact that I can interact with my students in real time. So there are definitely a lot of things that you kind of capture already and identify as really effective on both areas. But the thing is, in this approach, and that's the reason why we think blended learning could actually help you in this transition, is because you try to take the best of each, like the synchronous or asynchronous, and try to bridge and merge them together. So basically, instead of doing an entire activity, let's say an entire 3-hour lecture, identify things that you think in that lecture could be done in an asynchronous manner, where students would be able to develop some of that knowledge by themselves, basically. So you could have to identify, either that's a lecture or very specific activities, or even some type of assessment that you think could be done using both formats. So that's the goal of that bridging aspect. And again, that's a very key element of blended learning, is mixing those both modalities to actually maximize their use of it. So if you really want to think about this, that's basically an activity that we have for you now. So I'm sorry, I developed an activity using Padlets, which is this hyperlink. So hopefully, using the chat, actually, if you click on that link, you should be able to open it. And I'm going to leave that slide right now. I'm just going to go to the Padlet and explain a little bit what I'd like you to do in the next 5 minutes or so. Let me share my screen with you right now. So please click the link on the chat, and you should be able to direct it to this beautiful page with basically a visual of what the bridging may look like. So it looks a little bit funny, but I can explain as soon as you get a chance to see it. So now you should be able to see my screen, and basically have 2 circles. The circle on the left would be describing the things that you think work best in a synchronous manner. So some of you have been, indicating that lecture works best because I can keep the engagement with the students, I can keep interacting with them. So definitely something that we want to keep in this. But then on the right hand side would be the things that some of you again have been listing as working really well in an asynchronous manner, let's say peer assessment activities or contributing to discussions and so on. But then in the middle, which is the bridge. So basically trying to really take the best of both modalities and just put them together. So again, if let's say you have a lecture, and instead of having, let's say, a 3-hour lecture, you may want to do some of these things, and develop some of these things as asynchronous. And I think someone from language department just shared something, I think, with videos that students could maybe watch on their own, and then be able to contribute a little bit better in real time. So that's really the intent of that activity, is really try to rethink a little bit what you do and really maximize the use of both modalities. So to contribute, basically have that plus icon, and if you click on the plus, you'll be able to do two things. So to make best use of that particular platform, because we have so many of you today, in the title, you could actually indicate maybe the course code or maybe your name. So then you'll be able to, we'll be able to locate a little bit who is doing what. So I could just say maybe biology 200, and maybe my name, and then I would be writing, what are the things that I would do synchronously that I think work best in that particular case, and then maybe asynchronous list the things that could also work best in that matter. But I think what really matters in this case is really thinking about the things you've been putting on a chat or maybe writing on a piece of paper, and trying to think about how is it going to look like if I bridge both of them. So basically, if you have a lecture, again, I was giving that, I would say, simple example. Think about the things that students could maybe do on their own, and in the bridge, you would be listing, maybe some pre-reading for the lecture, or maybe watching videos and reading articles and these other things. Or if you have a case study, if in the case study you have a lot of group activities going on, and you think the real time will allow better engagement interactions, maybe to make best use of that time, having all the prep work being done online in an asynchronous manner, having students maybe reviewing the material, looking at the data, reading some articles, and then in the lecture they actually engage way more in the activity, but the prep work have been done asynchronously. So that will be listed in the bridge area. Okay. So again, if you have any questions, use the chat. If that's not clear, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to kind of use that system and just see how it goes. Okay. So click the plus button and just enter some information about this. So lecture, and then indicate a little bit what you expect with this. Right. Thank you. So I didn't have a chance, going so fast, I didn't have a chance to explain a little bit about Padlet. Padlet is, a virtual platform that could be used to kind of replicate something you would do, an activity with post-it notes. So you would have, let's say, participants in a room, and you ask them to reflect on something and put their notes on the wall. So it's basically recreating a virtual wall. So it's something that is free of use. It's not fully supported at UBC, but it doesn't require you to create any account. And Padlet has been used in a variety of disciplines by instructors to kind of engage students, being a little bit more reflective on some topics and concepts. And instead of using discussions, they thought a virtual wall would make it a little bit more visual. And if you want to, have a look at what the others are doing, once you've finished entering your information, you can always also refresh the page. So then you just add everything else that was created as you were writing, and you may be able to scroll down in each column. So for the synchronous, the bridging aspect, and the asynchronous as well. Yes, Padlet is, that particular Padlet has been used for, I would say, almost 1 or 2 years, and that basically that allows you to create a resource at the end. So unless you decide to close it or delete it, it'll always remain open with the same URL. Thank you, Gabby, for the for this question. We actually provide. I am actually facilitating a session on Proctorio on Wednesday from 1 to 2. It's actually a good question. How do we deliver exams in a fair manner? So we sometimes use Proctorio. In other disciplines, they've been using other systems like even Zoom. So definitely, if you're interested in having some options, on Wednesday we do have something on Proctorio. We also provide a lot of resources for online exams on the Keep Teaching website. So at the end of this session, as soon as this is over, we can send you a link with a variety of resources and key things, maybe also the session slides. So then you get a sense of what kind of support can you have, should you want to be doing some online exams.
Manuel, there are a few other questions about Padlet. I'll read them out if you're able to respond to them. We're wondering if you could use Padlet freely for a class of 30 students, whether it can be integrated in Canvas. I think those are the 2 big ones that jumped out so far.
Right, yes, I would say there is not necessarily any limitation of participants. Of course, the more you are, then in that case, as you can see, we have to scroll down quite a bit to look at all the different contributions. I don't see any number, in limitations in number. The other thing is, yes, it could be, let's say, embedded as a hyperlink into Canvas. It's not integrated into Canvas, but definitely you could just provide the link to the students, just like we've provided the link to you through the chat. So you have different ways of sharing these type of activity with the students, with or within or without using Canvas.
Thanks. I'm also noticing a couple questions here about how do you pick a time slot when students are in multiple time zones for synchronous activities? I think that's a really great question to be thinking of, and 2 of the strategies that you shared could certainly be ways to propose. So one of them being, do you vary the times throughout the week, or do you offer multiple different times? Another option could be providing like asynchronous opportunities to engage. So whether there might be a live discussion, but then perhaps someone could contribute once things go offline. So finding ways that people can choose to participate.
And something else about the real time, again, if you use, let's say, Collaborate, you can always record the session. So even though you don't have a chance as a student to engage at the same time, you still have a chance to watch the later on. So, what happens in real time can also become an interesting resource moving forward, which is also something we've seen in many, many courses. So if, let's say, you have a clear communication with the students ahead of time, say, at that moment on Thursday from, let's say, 10 to 12 Vancouver time, we'll have a session. If you're unable to come, just let me know. And then you can always just say, okay, I'm going to be recording the session, sharing the link with you, and then give still a chance to students to ask questions using a discussion, for example. So you always have different ways of engaging with them. Just make sure that they are not left behind using both modalities again. So thank you so much for contributing. Let me just refresh quickly the page just to have a look, but I hope that was actually useful for you to kind of start thinking about, okay, these are the things that maybe could be combined. And I can see a lot of really interesting activities in the bridge area for Asia, and synchronous post-lecture response questions and comments. So it's very rich. So thank you so much. And of course, I won't be closing the Padlet, so you can keep, interacting with this. If you want to retrieve some of the information you actually posted there, it's actually very simple. Again, I'll be making sure that you can still access it and just save save your contributions, basically. Okay. So I think we're going to go back to the slides. Yes, the background image is something that we actually use in a course on blended learning. So I'm actually happy to share it with you. It's an image that was used for the traditional blended learning, which is the face-to-face and the online. But definitely, I'm happy to share it with you. Absolutely. Okay, so let's go back to the slides. So I hope this sort of blending is starting to make sense for you guys. Again, it's really a starting conversation, and at the end of the session, I'll be redirecting you to resources or additional ways of getting support, with this transition. So I'm going to go back to the slide right now. Oh, thank you, Justin. So you've been giving a lot of different options and type of activities that you think could be working well in asynchronous, synchronous, and then thinking about how the bridge will look like and how the combination of both would look like. But then the question would be, what are the next steps for me, and how can I just decide to make this like really a working solution for me? So basically, that's actually not super nice looking on the slide, but hopefully it makes sense for you. We've tried to give you 3 types of blends. So basically, based on what you identify, am I going to have more synchronous? Am I going to have more asynchronous? And how the bridging would work. So the first one is the one that we provide at the bottom of the page. We have the flipped online learning. Some of you may have heard about the flipped classroom, which is some type of blend, which means the flipped classroom would be you keep doing what you do in the classroom. You teach, let's say, a 3-hour class, but then you give a chance for students to actually do some prep work online. So again, I was giving that example of a case study where all the prep material could be shared with the students ahead of time online. They would do some reading, they would do some exploration, and then in the case study, in the class, you still allocate the same time, but you actually maximize the time in class for really these activities. So a flipped portion of this allows you to really maximize the use of the real time in that case. So instead of doing this face-to-face, you would do it, let's say, on Collaborate Ultra. You would have an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours that are just dedicated entirely to this active learning with the students. So really give you a chance to concentrate on the engagement piece in their learning. So that's one format that we would suggest you using based on what are the things that that I'm seeing in that blend already. But then you could think about a time-reduced synchronous teaching. So basically, the idea is that you identify that maybe you don't have too much synchronous happening because you kind of realize that maybe a lot of things students can do on their own using Canvas or using discussions, using peer assessment, you realize maybe what is online allows you to actually do more things that you would be able to do in I would say in a face-to-face. So in that case, we kind of think about moving a little bit more to the asynchronous part, and then maybe what you would do synchronously wouldn't be needed anymore. Let's say if you have a 3-hour lecture and then you realize there is way more material, way more things happening online asynchronously, then instead of teaching for 3 hours, you would be teaching for maybe 2 hours. We've seen this in different domains. We've been working with different folks, let's say in SPPH, where they decided to kind of say, instead of teaching 3 hours, we're going to be teaching 2 hours, and then students have a little bit more activities going on online. So again, based on that on this initial activity, on that bridging, and then you realize that the mix is actually shifting to the asynchronous, then maybe you no longer need that much time synchronously. So again, for some of you who mentioned the fact that some students might be in China or in different countries, in different time zones, then maybe that format could allow you to actually transition to fully online in a better way for the students in particular. On these 3 approaches, what's a preferred format? So I don't have any preferred format. All I can do is suggestions. The thing is, if you look at those, the flipped would be easier, because the flip doesn't require you to change what you would do in real time, I would say what used to be the face-to-face. It doesn't ask you to reduce the amount of time you would be meeting with the students. So technically that would be the easiest, because what would be done asynchronously could be some documents that students need to read, hyperlinks to resources, the kind of things that happen quite often already. A lot of instructors don't realize they do blended learning already. A lot of folks just think, oh, I teach a fully face-to-face, and I put a couple of things online, I have a couple of quizzes, but that's already a blended learning happening there. So in fact, if you really try to put a name behind some of the actions you already take, you just realize I'm already there. So the flipped online learning basically does not require, I would say, as much effort as the second one with the time reduced, because if you start teaching less, then it means you have to put a little bit more in asynchronous on Canvas, having more resources, having more discussions, putting more material, but putting more thought to this. And that's the reason why the third objective is really to have a thoughtful concept of, how do I do this fusion of both, but really in a thoughtful way again. So the design piece would take a little bit more time as you move to the top. And the mixed format basically is also something that we could think as maybe an easy way to transition online. Let's say you could just decide, I want to keep this sort of real-time session at the beginning, because I can set the tone with my students. They have a chance to get to know me. They have a chance to talk to each other. And maybe the second or third week could be done fully asynchronously. So this mixed mode allows you to kind of say, I don't do a blend, but I do a blend in terms of, okay, the week 1 would be done like in real time. Midpoints, let's say week 6 or 7 could be done fully online in real time again, and the wrap up of the course also could be done in real time. Let's say if you have a lot of student presentations and you realize it's best to do them in real time, that definitely a format like this could be working. But in the other hand, you have to think about developing week 2 and 3, the weeks that are in the middle that you think could be done fully asynchronously. Then again, in the amount of thought that you have to put into this, and the work that is required to develop those things that could be just done by the students on their own is a different conversation, takes more time. So I would say the one at the bottom, the flipped online learning, would be the easiest in terms of transitioning to online, to a fully online format.
We have a question in the chat about how blended learning approaches can meet the requirements of 30 credit hours. And I would imagine that if a lecture is recorded and a student accesses and spends 45 minutes on it later, or they spend 45 minutes on it in real time, that would still be the same hours. Maybe Manuel, you could expand on that a bit.
So there's a risk with the blended, and the risk is always to put too much. And we've seen what we call the syndrome, and the syndrome of the class and a half, because sometimes in the traditional blended, we had instructors, teaching the same amount of work, face to face, and then they would just dump a lot of material online, and students ended up, having so much work to do online that they realized that it was no longer a single class, but that was the whole half was just, you know, overwhelming for students. So again, there is always a risk of putting too much. And when you do this sort of format, again, you really have to be thoughtful about, okay, how many hours am I asking students to dedicate to the real time, and how many hours am I dedicating to the asynchronous? So the timing is very, very important.
Thanks. We also have another question, which I think captures a few different questions in there around how to help new international students feel they're part of the group and forming friendships. So activities where students still get to know each other.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that's the reason why I think the mixed format could make sense, because the mixed format allows you to really set the tone of the course. Maybe the first 2 weeks, you know, you want to keep the real-time sessions, even though you may have a lot of students that are maybe you know, not located in Canada, so you may have to think a little bit about that approach. But that would allow you to really keep a strong presence as instructor. Just really be there for them. They have a chance to interact with you, get to know each other, having some group activities. And some of you have already described the kind of activities you could do in real time using breakout groups. So that's a way to kind of basically recreate those group activities synchronously. So the mixed format could allow you to really keep a really strong sense of community of learners, basically. But it doesn't mean that maybe a time-reduced synchronous teaching wouldn't be a good format for you. So again, I think the most important thing would be look at what you have in the bridge, look at what you have, and then consider the things like, what are the things that really matter to me as instructor? I am, you know, if you're really an excellent facilitator and you care about this presence, this connection and with the students, maybe you want to emphasize that a little bit more. So keeping a strong presence in real time without having to maybe stay for 3 hours, but maybe a little bit of, you know, a little bit less. Or some of you just think my course is really about, you know, again, interactions, group work. So I still need to have a strong real-time presence. So it has to be going through, look at the activities, look at the things that, you know, really make sense, but also what are the things that make sense for you as instructor, make you comfortable in moving forward with this, and also for the learners. And that's actually the next slide. We're going to be talking about the anxiety level based on, you know, based on that transition to online. And actually, we have great results to show you. Oh, maybe I should be opening that link for us. Okay. Give me a moment.
Manuel, I can add it online.
Okay.
Or you got it.
I can add the I can add the link and share it with you guys. Oh yeah, great, fantastic. So basically, we have an interesting results for you. I think I can share it with you on the chat as well. So then you have a chance to read it as well. We found an interesting article that talks about the anxiety when moving online, and the anxiety for the instructor and the anxiety for the students as well. So on the screen, you see a little graph that explains the faculty anxiety when moving online. So on the left, of course, you would have things that would lower that level of anxiety and things that would make it a bit higher. And if you look into the things that would keep lower, you would have the synchronous delivery. And of course, if you used to be teaching lectures and you're not used to, let's say, active learning and so on, maybe, you know, you want to just emphasize more on the synchronous delivery, which is the reason why I think the blend would allow you to actually identify the things that make you really comfortable when you want to move to a fully online environment. But then you could see that the asynchronous delivery would be higher in terms of anxiety. But I would put a note in there just saying it depends on your level of experience with Canvas. A lot of you may already have used Canvas quite a lot with discussions, peer assessment, and these other things are already familiar, and you don't even see it as a source of anxiety. So it all depends, you know, on also on your experience with the learning technology in general. And that's the second piece, you know, being familiar or unfamiliar. So then you know, based on the blend that you kind of see happening already in your course, think about yourself as well, and think about your learners, because these are the things that will ultimately allow you to make a more informed decision when you want to move online, fully online. And Jocelyn, if you can maybe scroll down a bit, so then we get to see the students' anxiety graphic. So again, when moving online, it's just like when moving face to face. It's really important to put the learners, you know, in the equation, and how the students would feel like if we were to offer more synchronous. And that's actually the opposite. If you start offering more synchronous session, it seems to be a source of anxiety for students. I would say that would make particular sense if you have students that are not necessarily located in BC, and then they won't have a chance to engage with you in real time. They won't have a chance to engage with their classmates. So what are the things, you know, you could do in that case? So again, it's important to think broadly about the context. Who are my students? Where they're from? And maybe a way for you to make a final decision on this. Should we be moving a little bit more, you know, real time or more to the asynchronous side of things? Would have, you know, you would have to have a really clear communication with the students ahead of time. Just say, you know, getting to know them a little bit better, getting to know the expectations, just like we've done with you. You know, before starting this session, we just ask you what are the things you'd like to leave with this session. So maybe something very similar with the students. And I would say in a regular pace, having regular announcement, having regular discussions with them, just to make sure that the format you actually follow is actually working for them. So always keep the conversation open would allow you to really reduce the sense of anxiety, but also you know, your sense of anxiety as well, because you will feel more comfortable looking at, you know, what students respond back to the input you put. And Jocelyn, feel free to step in. Sorry, I was kind of taken into this.
No, but thanks for taking the lead on that. I've been monitoring the discussion, so it looks like there's a lot of interest in connection in particular, and creating spaces for students to be able to get to know each other. And so I wonder if there's ways to like, I know one instructor will like introduce themselves via video on the first day and share some things that aren't necessarily just about the course. And it could be an invitation to invite students to do the same, to get to know each other, having like a getting to know you discussion board, to have a sense of who it is they're in the class with, even though they're not having those organic conversations when they're bumping into each other in person, as one way to approach that.
Right. And I think there was a question about, you know, why would students be more anxious with synchronous? So there is an interesting explanation on this on that particular slide, but saying it's not always easy for them to engage in real time. So again, back to the fact that some of them may not be there, you know, in the same time zone. And you know, if you are in China and you have a class that is starting at 3 a.m. in the morning, again, that would, you know, that wouldn't be ideal for those students. So that's the main point, is the time zone. So let us go back to the slides real quick, because we only have 5 minutes left. Oops. The key considerations we wanted to share with you. So basically a nice way to wrap up some of the things we've seen in the graphic already. So the key consideration to make asynchronous really a good decision for you, or the synchronous piece. So asynchronous will really reinforce the self-regulated learning, meaning students can learn a lot on their own and make them really motivated, engage in different ways. So students work at their own pace. So again, if you have a lot of students in different time zones, definitely the asynchronous would be something important to consider. They have a sense of control of their learning, the timing that they can take. Let's say if you provide short video clips on key concepts, they can actually play the video again and again and again, and maybe have discussions with them. So then you can, you know, you kind of make sure that they get, you know, they get where they're supposed to get. Assess student readiness. So again, when you have a lot of asynchronous, when you have a computer and you don't know, you know, where the students are, you have this sense of loneliness that you need to control a little bit more, and you also want to make sure that they are getting where they are supposed to be. So if you have lots of readings and they're supposed to do quite a lot of activities online, it's important to maybe have short quizzes or discussions to make sure that, you know, you can monitor the progress a little bit better, and that, you know, they are not left behind, basically. And also you have also a chance to build a sense of community in an asynchronous manner, even though some of you may not think that's the case. But if you have discussions, if you have a lot of peer work and stuff like that, you can actually build a strong collaboration between the students. Oh, the raise hand in Collaborate is allowing you to actually have me pay attention to what's going on. You know, even though I'm talking and I can hear a lot of chat messages, the raise hand is a way for you to pay attention to you, basically. And on the synchronous, you maintain the teacher's social presence, basically. So, you know, it's important, if for you it's important to set the tone of the course, be available to the students, and have a chance to interact with them in real time, then definitely those aspects, you have to keep them in mind. The pace, everything goes slower in real time. Very important. Whenever you ask a question for, you know, per se in the class, you may have an answer almost right away. In a synchronous session like this, it always takes time for the learner to actually activate the microphone or type something in the chat. So you have always a delay. So we always assume the teaching in particular is always slower. You can engage students in different ways. Some of you already know the chat, the breakout groups that allows you to really have group activities, polls, question polls, very similar to what you would do in the class with clicker questions. Also a nice way to assess the student readiness. So if you expect them to have read a particular article, you can have very, very simple questions right at the beginning of the synchronous class, just to make sure you're on the same page. You can also monitor student questions using the chat as well. And an important thing you may not necessarily have in asynchronous is to troubleshoot if they have any issues with the microphone. So again, that can always you know, take you out from you know, teaching properly, because you may have to deal with technical issues from students. Are there any questions? You can use the microphone, but I would say, because we are so many today, you can always use the chat and ask a couple of questions. I give you 1 minute, and then we can do the wrap-up. Yes, we'll be providing the slides as well as, you know, the session recording, and some of the key things we've seen in the chat also will be probably summarized. So then you get a sense of, okay, you know, what are the next steps for me? And that's basically the most important thing for us, is just support you in the next steps.
There's also a few questions I've noticed about kind of balancing instructor cognitive load in terms of having the chat on the go and the screen on the go, and how students might ask questions or engage with the session. One other option is to enable annotations like we have, and you should all see at the top of your screen, there's a bar with a text icon or a pencil icon, and we have this blank screen here. So another option could be to try asking questions right on that same screen.
So we have 1 minute left. So I just wanted to quickly give you a couple of resources before you actually leave. So this session is actually based on a course that we're going to be offering on May 11th and 15th, which is the Blended Learning in a Changing Environment course. It's a course that we've been offering over the last 3 or 4 years at CTLT. And again, I highly invite you, if you think, you know, this session is actually kind of raising a lot of interesting things and ideas for you, to register for this course, because we'll be doing basically the same types of reflection, but to a way bigger degree, and then give you a sense of, okay, if I need to teach next week, how is, you know, going to look like on Canvas, and how is it going to look like really in practice? So we're going to be offering this course. So I highly recommend it to you, and we provide the hyperlink for registration. And then we have a couple of additional resources for inclusive teaching, the EduBytes, which is on effective online teaching practices, and we also have a resource wiki page for the CTLT Institute as well. So this course in particular is going to be offered just in a blended format. So basically we have 2 synchronous sessions. The first session will be on the 11th, and the second one will be on the 13th, and everything else happen asynchronously. So we actually want to model the blended learning format through that course in particular. So we only expect 2 real-time sessions. The rest of it, you don't need to log in at a particular time. You just do the course at your own pace.
Manuel, can you confirm, is it a 4-day course or a 3-day course for the blended learning?
So it's going to be within 5 days, within the week of Monday to Friday. But again, we only require 2 real-time sessions. The rest is done fully online, asynchronously. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure. Thank you.